District 76. I'm going to take just probably about 15-20 minutes to talk a little bit about the Every Student Succeeds Act and the Diamond Lake School District report card and our school ratings. The presentation is going to talk a little bit about the Illinois framework for learning. It's going to talk a little bit about the recipe for what schools are utilizing to determine accountability, and then talk a little bit about our school ratings, that being commendable, and then also talk a little bit right at the end about our district's strategic plan. So, you know, our basic goals for tonight are just to get a general understanding of the ESSA legislation and how it impacts school accountability. Talk a little bit about how school accountability is calculated and the school rating system. And then at the end, I'm going to tie that learning framework to our strategic plan. So what I'd like to do first is start out with the Illinois framework for schools. So many schools, as they have in the past, are required to put together school improvement plans. It's a process whereby each school and each district puts together basically a plan that says how your schools are going to improve. With that being said, there are 7 components that the state would like us to focus on, many of which we already focus on. So this is really not too much that is new, but generally speaking, one of those components is continuous improvement. Are we continuously looking at our systems and our processes and procedures to see if there are areas of growth and opportunities for growth? We want to always focus on our culture and climate, ensuring that we have buy-in in our community, staff and students, ensuring that we have shared leadership. Obviously, shared leadership deals with having our teachers involved in the process, having students involved in the process, having board members and community members involved in the process. Number 4 is when we talk about school improvement, we talk about governance, management, and operations. That largely deals with budgets, fiscal management, things of that nature. Number 5 focuses on education and employee quality. That is our professional development system. We have a professional development plan in place. We have focused professional development for teachers. We have teacher leadership opportunities, so ensuring that our teachers are of high quality. Number 6 is the family and school connection, ensuring that our school system has that component within it, and then the core of our business is student learning. So our school and district improvement plan, which is our strategic plan, should focus on these 7 components. Under the new ESSA legislation, for the purpose of this presentation, we're just going to talk about elementary school districts. And so for elementary school districts, our goals in accordance with the state ESSA legislation is that all of our students are assessed in kindergarten. We already conduct the kids assessment on the 40th day for all kindergarten students. In addition to that, by the year 2032, and I'll get back to this on several occasions, the year 2032 will come up again, is that 90% of our 3rd graders should be reading at grade level, and 90% of our 5th graders should be meeting or exceeding expectations in math. That is the statewide goal. Those are considered ambitious goals. In addition to that, all students should be supported by highly effective teachers and administrators. And then additionally, we want to ensure that we have a safe and healthy learning environment for all students. This next brief presentation is a little YouTube video that we utilized at the board meeting several months ago talking about ESSA. It's really about looking at the recipe for how we hold schools accountable. And so in the past, the school accountability system has been really basic. It's been about one assessment. It's been about the PARCC assessment and whether kids get certain attainment levels. Did they meet the grade level proficiency on the test? That was the entire school accountability system was related to that assessment. Schools have now recognized, districts have now recognized, the state has now recognized that there's a whole lot more that goes into schooling than just that PARCC assessment. And so the new accountability system is trying to capture those other elements of the recipe. And so This will show you it's a real quick video. It's just music and words, or music and writing. There's no talking or anything like that, but it's kind of cute. So we'll have a moment to kind of see what the new ESSA legislation is about. So essentially, what if I click to the next slide here. Oh. So essentially, what that video is describing is that in the past we had really one indicator, that was the PARCC assessment, but now we've really needed to shift that mindset to recognize that there are several other things that are important to schooling. And so over the next two slides, what I'm going to talk about are those indicators, the things that are seemingly important from both an academic side and then also like a school quality side. So within the ESSA accountability system now, there are other academic measures. Of the entire recipe, 75% of that recipe comes from academic indicators. Those indicators are science proficiency, which is 5th and 8th grade students who take the Illinois Science Assessment. ELA proficiency and math proficiency as defined by some assessment that the state has yet to create, but I think it's going to be called the Illinois Assessment of Readiness that will come out this upcoming spring. EL proficiency, which is determined by our access scores. ELA and math growth as determined by that Illinois Assessment of Readiness that will be coming out again in spring. Also for high schools, but not necessarily related to us, is the high school graduation rate. So these are the academic indicators that go into determining school success. There are also quality indicators. Those quality indicators include, but are not all developed yet at this time. So the legislation has come out, they put together a framework, but not all of the components of the framework are in complete order. So some of those things are the fine arts indicator. Do we have a fine arts program? Many school districts throughout the state don't have the money to run fine arts programs, so that's part of the quality indicator. Our chronic absenteeism, how many of our kids are missing more than, I believe it's 10% of the school year, if I remember correctly. Climate survey, are we doing the 5 Essentials climate survey that some of you guys have done already? Then these indicators here, the pre-K through 2 indicator is yet to be determined what that will look like. And then the elementary EL middle EL and middle school middle grades indicator has yet to be developed as well. And then for the high schools, again, that's ninth graders who are on track to graduate, making sure you didn't have any failing classes in your ninth grade year. And then high school and college and career readiness, as I'm assuming will be determined by the SAT assessment. So when we go back to that recipe analogy, how much of each ingredient is here. So when we take a look at the weighting system, and this weighting system is important because it kind of determines which elements are more important or more heavily weighted than others. It should be noted that what is very new to the Illinois accountability system is that of growth. So in the past, our PARCC assessment just told us whether or not kids were grade level proficient in 3 through 8 in math and ELA. Many of us in this room have had the conversation recognizing that when kids enter Diamond Lake School District 76 in kindergarten, they are at various points, various readiness points. So what the state has recognized is it's not so much, not that it's not important, but what's even more important is whether kids grow when they're with us. So they all have different starting points, but also recognize that the largest chunk of that recipe is now whether or not children are growing. So in addition to that, obviously 5% of this is English language learner proficiency, science proficiency, and then you can see the quality indicators as listed here. All between about 5 and 10%, but the largest chunk of that that accountability measure will come from ELA and math growth that will be determined based on previous year PARCC scores and this up and coming Illinois Assessment of Readiness. Now, when we take a look at all those indicators, this is where it gets a little bit convoluted, and I'm going to try and keep this as simple and explain this as simple as I can, both for myself and for everyone else, is my hope. Student groups. I believe the state has included 14 different student groups within their measurement system. Each one of these student groups is measured with those academic and quality indicators. So each one of these individual groups is measured by ELA proficiency, math proficiency, ELA and math growth, Illinois science assessment. And so in Diamond Lake School District 76, not all student groups are represented. You know, obviously we have economically disadvantaged, English language learners, Hispanic, Latino, African American, white, Asian, children with disabilities, or students who were former English language learners. Each one of those individual groups will be gauged using those indicators. So I'm going to try and walk us through an example as to how we then determine whether or not we've sort of made the grade and what our targets are going back to that year I said earlier, that 2032 year. For a moment, let's just take, for example, if you will, Asian Pacific Islanders. Asian Pacific Islanders are not a student group within Diamond Lake School District 76. However, in 2017, Asian Pacific Islanders in the state of Illinois performed at 51% met or exceeded their proficiency rate in ELA. So what the state did for all of these different subgroups is find out where they were in 2017 and then determine each year how much growth those individual groups needed to grow in order to get to that 90% in the year 2032. So the Asian Pacific Islander group starts at 51%, has to make about 3%, 2%, 2.5% growth in 2018, 2.5% growth in 2019, 2.5% growth in 2020, all the way to the point of proficiency in 2032. All right? So when we get to looking at this example, what I want us to do is then take it one step further to understand how this big recipe gets calculated. So going back to like my goals for this presentation is that we have a general understanding as to how each one of those different indicators is calculated to determine our school rating. All right? So just for example, we're going to stick with Asian Pacific Islanders for this example. Let me move into the next slide and try and explain this to the best of my ability without complicating it too much. Let's take the indicators that we described earlier. Let's take a look at, and this is just an example. The example is ELA proficiency, ELA growth, and science proficiency. Let's just, for argument's sake, say that we're only talking about that one subgroup. We're going to do this, the state will do this for us for every subgroup, but this is just the one subgroup, Asian Pacific Islanders. So let's say, just for an example, Asian Pacific Islanders improved. You remember I talked about how Asian Pacific Islanders started at 51% and had to get to around 54%. Let's say they improved, but they didn't meet that 54%. So the state has put together a point system for each indicator. They improved, Asian Pacific Islanders improved, so they get 50 points for ELA proficiency. This is a very generic example, and there's some other equations that are involved in it, but I don't want to get into it too much. Then let's take a look at another academic indicator, that is ELA growth. Let's say Asian Pacific Islanders, in ELA growth, they grew, and they were within 95% of the target. So they grew, but they didn't meet the target, but they were within 95% confidence interval of the target. So the Asian Pacific Islander group gets 75 points for that category. Let's move to the next category, which would be science proficiency. Then in science, the Asian Pacific Islander group, they had no change. They didn't move up, but they stayed within 75% confidence interval of their target. They get 25 points. Now, the equation then would be for all of those academic indicators, right, in accordance with their weighting system, the 7.5%, 50%, so on and so forth, and they would average up those scores. So for simplicity, we're just going to do a simple equation here, which we would take these three scores, 50 plus 75 plus 25. We'd come up with a total score of 150 divided by the three categories, again, super generic example, and we would get a score of 50 for the Asian Pacific Islander group. Okay? With that said, then that 50, that Asian Pacific Islander group, would get compared with all other schools within the state. That would determine where the Asian Pacific Islander group falls and our schools fall in terms of their designation. I should probably stop and make sure I have any questions. I really did try to keep this as simple, but also not overwhelm anybody at the same time. Any questions at this point? All right. So then, that Asian Pacific Islander group, it's a 50. It has it falls somewhere along the line with all other schools in the state, and then that group gets a rating. Schools that are exemplary are schools that are performing in the top 10% of all schools in the state for all categories. Commendable schools are schools that have no underperforming student groups. So that Asian Pacific Islander, let's say it's a 50, and let's say they fall right in the middle of the pack, right? You are commendable and exemplary only if you have no student group, no Asian Pacific Islanders, no whites, no blacks, no Hispanics, no ELs, who fall in the underperforming category. The underperforming category is where one of any of those subgroups falls below the bottom 5%. So really you have two groups. The lowest performing, which is the bottom 5% in the state, You have the exemplary, which is the top 10% of the state, and then you have the commendable that falls in the middle of that 85, that's that 85% of the middle that has no individual student group below that bottom 5%. So the commendable group obviously is a wide range, but it includes any school system that is not in the top 10 but has no individual student groups that fall within below that 5%. That is a vast span within the commendable group. All of our schools in this district fall within that range. None of our subgroups, student groups, fall below the bottom 5%. And so for our school, West Oak, Diamond Lake, Fairhaven, we are blessed this year to have all commendable schools. We feel very proud of that, strong. We do a lot of work focused on ensuring that our students that are coming from low income and EL backgrounds are receiving the supports in our intervention programs. And so we continue as a school district to focus on these things. We focus on a rigorous and academic curriculum. We focus on strong RTI supports for many of our children who need additional assistance. We focus on a comprehensive social emotional curriculum, both through PBIS and our second step program. We're blessed to have a dual language program that focuses on biliteracy and biculturalism. We recognize the importance of that within our community, and we're committed to an activities program that ensures that kids are getting involved in our schools through fine arts, athletics, music, art clubs, so on and so forth. So then to kind of go back, what I would like to do for just a moment is then wrap this up by sharing with you the district strategic plan. So essentially, if you'll recall, I think it was the first slide that I shared talked about the Illinois framework for school improvement. Our school improvement plan, our district focus is this. And so I'm not going to go through each individual component. Those of you who work here know this quite well, but it's focused on 5 areas of excellence. That is our academic area, our operational excellence, our excellence in communications, our professional excellence, and our excellence in finances. And so we go about developing and continuously improving our schooling system by focusing on these 5 areas. And then this just gives you a brief understanding as to what the ESSA legislation is about and what school accountability now looks like in Illinois moving forward. I didn't want to take too long. It was about 20 minutes. So if there are any questions, even from colleagues.
I just wanted to make a comment because I believe that we received our commendable status because of going back to the quality frameworks. I believe it was slide 2 or 3, where there's 7 components. Our plan is based on that, all of our goals and priorities, but I think what's not said on here, but that what we do, and I think what is a priority for us, it's embedded in everything, is that shared leadership piece that Steve talked about, as well as that cycle of continuous improvement that we always stop, we reflect, and we do it not only as a district level, but a building level, a grade level, a department level, so that it's just become habitual and can stop. How's it going? Are kids, learning? Are they doing things we do? Do we continue with what we're doing? Do we stop with what we're doing and change things because it's not working? Or do we start something different so we can see improvement? So I think those 2 things, in addition, the 7 quality frameworks, in addition to what we already have, is why we are on the path to commendable and hopefully exemplary soon.
Yeah, absolutely. We have so many layers of shared leadership in this district, whether it comes from our grade level teacher leaders, our building leadership teams, our district leadership team, our professional advisory council. We are constantly reviewing, reflecting, revising. There's no doubt driven group of people. Any questions?
So what happens in 2032?
In 2032,
It's gonna be called something, no, it's gonna be called something else.
So like what happens if you don't meet these targets as a school? Are there
well, I
consequences
think again, those point systems that you get, right, and where our school ratings will be, are all comparison related. I mean, so if we're not meeting it and everybody else is, and we fall below, then we would fall into what is sort of like called this Illinois Empower category. And so I think in there, one of the handouts I had shared with you has this thing that just says Illinois Empower. So if we fall into an underperforming or lowest performing school system, what we will be doing then is we will be getting additional assistance from the state that allows us to partner with other institutions, whether it's local regional offices of education or an opportunity for like outside vendors to help us and assist us in improving our academic performance. Again, also just remember that our performance rating is a comparison rating to other schools. So with No Child Left Behind, with No Child Left Behind, it was expected that from, I believe it was 2001 to 2014, that 100% of our students would meet the target. That clearly is not a realistic measure or attainable goal. Illinois State, when they developed the ESSA legislation, recognizes that the 90% goal is extraordinarily ambitious and sort of like a stretch goal, but they wanted to include it in the language. I think that what will happen is, as the years progress and growth becomes, I guess, as we see growth measures reflect sort of an actual or common sense type of level, what you're going to see is, I guess, how do I describe it? You're going to see all schools sort of at similar, it's not the right way to put it. If not all schools reach 90%, I don't think that all schools will be determined as failing, I guess is what I should say, but rather schools will still be measured against one another. Ultimately, what would happen, and what you'll see if this does not happen by 2032, is that I don't believe that the state is going to be considering all of our schools as failing. So I can't see completely into the future, but I think what they'll continue to do is take a common sense approach to what are realistic expectations, and 90% at this point, even within the language of the law, recognizes that those are stretch goals, those are aspirational goals, not necessarily realistic.
And I think too, if I can add to that, for No Child Left Behind, they had a certain increment every year from
Right.
2001 to 2014. Okay, if you're 50%, 55%, 60, and you had to, but then you were penalized if you didn't get that. So whether that was dollars not given to you, or a mark against your name, or it was in the paper, I feel like with this process, even though it's not perfect by any means, the schools that need the most support are getting the most support. So if you are in underperforming, or I forget what the bottom one is called,
Yeah,
the lowest performing, but if you're at either one of those tier 1 or tier 2 schools, you're getting more dollars from the state than the commendable or the exemplary schools. So that's the nice part about it, is if you aren't performing, or you don't feel like you don't have the achievement levels that where you should be, or what the state is designating, or federal legislation guidelines are designating, and you're getting more dollars provided to you to get the professional development and the resources that you need for your kids. So I feel like that's the difference too between, so I don't know what's going to happen. I think this is just a way to hold for accountability, but I feel like for the kids or the schools that aren't meeting, you're going to get more resources, which is different than the past.
And I would also say that, and this I guess is what I was trying to say before, despite the fact that No Child Left Behind, just like Dr. Sherman was describing, had these incremental growth plans. Just because they put that plan in place didn't mean that schools actually grew according to their plan. And what you're seeing here within the ESSA legislation, as those targets are built in, is probably going to be somewhat similar. And so our school ratings will be based on our comparison to other schools, but I don't know that just because we put together these, I don't know that I'm going to be able to get back to this. I don't know that just because we put together these targets that that's going to happen. And the state recognizes that, I would say.
So, for the purpose of funding, is the state only going to be funding the bottom 2-tier schools? Or, so like in commendable, because that range is so large,
Sure.
if you have several groups performing at 6% growth, it's not under,
Right.
but it's still
Right.
not ideal. So is there more meaningful analysis happening?
You know, and I think Eric Rogers would be great to explain this, but I think that our state within ESSA, and I really just covered the academic side, also has a financial side that exists, and that's sort of an adequacy target, taking a look at every school and how much money it costs to run that school system with that number of students, administrators, teachers, so on and so forth. And the state has put in place now an equation for schools that are not being appropriately funded to receive any additional dollars from the state. I can't remember, were we tier 3?
We're tier 2, we're adequately funded, we're 82%. So the state says, you know, everybody should be at 100%. If you're over 100%, you're not gonna get the dollars from the state. But if you're under 100%, then you're gonna get a proportionate amount to get you to that 100% based on your student enrollment and your operating costs.
Yeah, so we did receive some additional monies this year, and if I remember correctly, kind of earmarked for EL services, English language services, things
And
like that.
professional development.
And professional development for those things.
We
But-
got about $60,000 more.
But two, I think one of the good things about this too, kind of like you were alluding to, Bob, is that schools are not being penalized like they have been in the past, because that you're really not providing a success story when you're penalizing schools. And so I think this is giving schools that are underperforming, for the lowest 5%, an opportunity to reach out to professional providers that are going to help them in those areas. You know, so being a commendable school like ourselves, we are able to assist and provide assistance to underperforming and the lowest performing schools as one of those providers. Any other questions? No? All right, well, thank you guys for coming. I promised you 20 minutes, and you know, Chris, it was